You walk through marble corridors lit by trembling torchlight. The air smells of incense and decay. Somewhere ahead, a man murmurs softly, words of devotion carried on the cold air. You round the corner, expecting to find a priest in prayer. Instead, you see Rome's emperor kneeling before a coffin, whispering to a woman who has been dead for months. Before we begin this haunting descent into the mind of Nero Claudius Caesar, take a moment to join our growing community of history lovers. Every week, we explore the moments when power and madness intertwined to reshape civilizations. So, if stories like this fascinate you, tap the like button and subscribe. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? It's incredible to think that 2,000 years later, we're piecing together this story from across the globe, united by a shared fascination with the echoes of the ancient past. Now, the story begins not in madness, but in mourning. When Poppaea Sabina died in the summer of 65 AD, the Roman world assumed that grief would soon pass from Nero's palace like a summer storm. Death was no stranger to emperors, but what followed was not grief as the Romans understood it. It was ritualized insanity, an emperor attempting to resurrect love through artifice and delusion. Poppaea had been more than Nero's consort. She was his mirror, ambitious, cunning, and dazzlingly beautiful. Even her enemies admitted her magnetism. "No woman was ever more admired," wrote Tacitus, though his admiration dripped with unease. She had tamed a boy emperor, guided him, and at times provoked him. When she died, struck down, most say, by Nero's own hand in a moment of rage, the emperor's soul fractured like glass. At first, the palace followed protocol. A funeral procession wound through the streets, priests intoning sacred hymns, the scent of myrrh filling the air. But Nero refused to let her go. He ordered her body preserved, not cremated as Roman custom demanded, but embalmed in the Eastern style, sealed in alabaster and perfumed oils. For days he would visit the tomb, sitting beside the sarcophagus, stroking the marble as if it were her skin. He whispered to her, "Sabina, my goddess, my eternal flame." Servants overheard him speaking in two voices, his and hers. Some claimed they saw him kiss the cold stone lips of her funerary mask. Others whispered that the emperor had begun to dine beside her embalmed body, pouring wine onto the ground as though she might drink. To the Senate, it was horrifying blasphemy. To Nero, it was devotion. He commanded that statues of Poppaea be erected in temples across Rome, draped in gold, her name invoked in the same breath as Venus. In the palace, no one dared speak her name without reverence. Her favorite perfumes were burned daily in bronze censers. Her empty chair was set at every banquet. Her attendants continued to lay out her garments as if she might rise from her tomb at any moment to wear them again. And at the center of this vast empire, the most powerful man in the world drifted further from reality. There were nights when music echoed through the palace halls long after the court had retired. Nero would summon musicians, demanding they play the songs Poppaea once loved. He would stand before her portrait, his favorite, painted by a Greek master, and perform arias of grief, tears streaking his face beneath the lamplight. He began to dress in mourning robes of black and silver, declaring, "The sun shall not shine upon Rome until she returns." Rome whispered. Senators muttered that the emperor had lost his mind. Philosophers spoke of divine punishment. The people pitied him, but also feared him. For grief in a god-king could become anything: cruelty, madness, or divine wrath. And yet, beneath the horror, there was something tragically human in his descent. Nero had been raised to believe that power could bend the world to his will. From childhood, he was told he was chosen, half man, half god. So, when death took Poppaea from him, he refused to accept that even the Emperor of Rome could be powerless before it. In the gardens of the Domus Aurea, his golden palace, Nero built shrines filled with her images, dozens of them, marble faces that smiled without warmth, eyes carved from polished glass that followed him wherever he walked. One servant, writing years later, described how Nero would pause before each likeness and speak as though it could hear him. He believed, the servant wrote, that her spirit watched through those eyes. At banquets, he left a seat beside him empty, her seat, and ordered the guests to toast to "my living goddess." Courtiers would force their smiles, pretending not to notice the emptiness beside the emperor's golden chair. One night, when a senator faltered in his toast, Nero struck him across the face with a goblet and shouted, "You will not disrespect my wife while she dines." That same week, he decreed that Poppaea be deified. Statues of her crowned with stars appeared across the empire. Coins were minted bearing her image and the inscription Dive Poppaea Avgv Stei, to the divine Poppaea, Empress Eternal. But even that divine elevation did not satisfy him. Worshipping her image was not enough. Nero wanted her alive. He wanted her presence beside him once more, the sound of her voice, the shape of her face, the warmth of her hand on his arm as he sang. And so, deep within the labyrinth of his grief, an idea began to take root. If gods could raise the dead, why not Rome's living god? It started as a whisper, perhaps from one of his flatterers, perhaps from the emperor's own fevered imagination. A rumor reached him of a young servant, a boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to Poppaea Sabina. The same eyes, the same delicate mouth, the same fragile grace. In another world it might have been dismissed as coincidence, but in Nero's world, where reality bent to desire, that resemblance became revelation. In the quiet of his private chambers, Nero spoke again to the embalmed body of his lost empress. "Soon, my love," he whispered, "soon I will bring you back." The torches flickered and the air smelled of roses and rot, and somewhere in the palace a boy named Sporus was summoned to the emperor's attention, unaware that he had just been chosen to play the most tragic role in the empire's history. The summons came without warning. In the cool dawn light of Nero's golden palace, servants hurried through the corridors with eyes fixed on the ground, unwilling to meet one another's gaze. Somewhere in the heart of that gilded maze, a boy waited, confused, terrified, and trembling. His name was Sporus. He had been born a slave within these same marble walls, raised in the service of imperial attendants. For years he had been invisible. That morning he would have given anything to remain so. When Nero entered the chamber, he carried the scent of wine and roses, perfume heavy enough to mask the faint trace of embalming oils that still clung to him from his nightly vigils beside Poppaea's body. The emperor's gaze fell upon the boy, and the air seemed to tighten. Sporus was slight, his skin pale against the gold of the chamber lamps. His face, delicate, symmetrical, unscarred, bore an uncanny resemblance to the dead empress. The same soft jaw, the same oval eyes that had once watched over Rome from the imperial balcony. Nero stepped closer. "Turn your face to the light," he murmured. Sporus obeyed. For a long moment the emperor said nothing. Then, quietly, almost tenderly, he whispered, "Poppaea." Those who witnessed it later said that something changed in Nero's expression then, an almost religious rapture overtaking grief. When he looked upon the boy, he did not see Sporus. He saw salvation. The gods had returned what they had taken. From that day forward, Sporus ceased to be a person. He became a project. Within the week, imperial physicians were summoned from across Rome. Men trained in battlefield medicine and household remedies, now commanded to perform something far stranger. They were told to make the boy fit for marriage. No one dared ask what that meant. Orders from the emperor were divine law, and disobedience meant death. The procedure was carried out in the private wing of the Domus Aurea, behind curtains woven with gold. No chronicler recorded the details, but ancient physicians like Celsus and Galen left enough to imagine the horror. Sharp bronze instruments, oil lamps burning low, cloth to muffle screams. Sporus would have been held down as the imperial doctors worked, sweat beading on their brows, their hands trembling with the weight of both medicine and sacrilege. When it was done, the boy lay still, pale and broken. Nero visited the next morning, his eyes glittering in the torchlight. "You will heal," he said softly. "The gods have given you back to me." In the days that followed, the transformation continued, not through flesh alone, but through ritual. Palace seamstresses, perfumers, and attendants were summoned to craft a living reflection of the empress who had died. Fine silks from Alexandria were tailored to the boy's frame. Rings once worn by Poppaea were slipped onto his fingers. Gold dust was brushed through his hair until it gleamed in the lamplight. Sporus was given a new name, Sabina, after Poppaea Sabina herself. To the emperor, it was not mockery, but restoration. "You are my Sabina reborn," Nero said. "The fates have spun her thread again." There were lessons, too. Tutors instructed Sporus in the gestures of imperial womanhood, how to tilt his head, how to smile with modesty, how to walk with the measured grace of an empress. His voice was trained to softness, his laughter rehearsed until it matched Nero's memories. Day after day, he was made to study portraits of Poppaea, to memorize her posture, her poise, her gaze. Each lesson stripped another layer of the person he had once been, until only the performance remained. In the palace gardens, Nero would stroll with him at dusk, speaking to him as though to a ghost made flesh. "Do you remember," he would ask, "the jasmine that bloomed on our wedding night?" Sporus, no, Sabina, would nod, though he remembered nothing but the terror of his own silence. The court played along. Senators bowed to Empress Sabina, their faces masks of fear. At banquets, Sporus sat beside Nero, veiled in silk, smiling when expected, silent when not. Musicians sang love songs written for Poppaea, their lyrics unchanged, their audience grotesquely altered. And Rome, which had whispered of Nero's grief, now whispered of something far darker. Outside the palace, the city groaned under the emperor's delusions. The treasury drained to fund his lavish displays of mourning. Temples still burned incense in Poppaea's name, though she was long gone. But inside the golden halls, Nero had achieved his resurrection. The dead empress walked again, her laughter recreated, her beauty rebuilt from pain and terror. Even as his empire began to crack under rebellion and corruption, Nero's obsession deepened. He began to speak of marrying Sabina in a grand ceremony, to make official what his madness had already decreed. "Rome shall see her returned," he told his advisers, "and they shall worship her as I do." But some whispered that Sporus's eyes had begun to change. Where once there had been fear, there was now a distant emptiness, the calm of someone who no longer expected deliverance. He performed his role flawlessly, but the soul behind the performance had gone quiet. On one night, recorded by rumor and fear, Nero hosted a private feast. Musicians played softly as the emperor and his living ghost dined alone. Servants said they heard laughter echo from the chamber, Nero's booming joy, and another voice, higher, uncertain, almost mechanical. When the doors opened hours later, Sporus emerged veiled and silent, his hands trembling around a goblet of wine. To the guests waiting beyond, Nero announced with a triumphant smile, "My wife has returned to me." They applauded because they had to, because no one dared remind the emperor that love could not be stitched from silk or carved from flesh. In the golden light of Rome's most decadent palace, the boy once called Sporus had become a mirror for a dead woman, a reflection with no soul behind it, a performance demanded by an emperor who could not bear the silence of his own guilt. And as the musicians played and the torches burned low, one thought seemed to shimmer beneath the surface of that endless masquerade. What happens when a man who has conquered the world decides he can also conquer death? Soon the answer would come, written not in marble or gold, but in blood. The morning light spilled over Rome, gilding the marble arches, and the crowd gathered in the forum. Trumpets blared, and the emperor appeared. Nero, draped in robes of hammered gold, his face glowing with pride and madness. Beside him, beneath a jeweled veil, sat Empress Sabina. The crowd gasped at the vision, the dead empress reborn, riding beside her husband. Only those who dared look too long noticed the tremor in the figure's hands, the boyish shoulders hidden beneath silk. Sporus, the slave, the child, the imitation, had become Rome's living ghost. Nero raised his hand to the cheering masses. "Behold, your goddess returned," he cried. The crowd obeyed, shouting the name of Poppaea Sabina, the woman long dead. Their voices rose like incense, hollow praise offered to a lie. In that moment, Sporus understood the truth of his existence. He was not a man, nor a woman, nor even human in Nero's eyes. He was an echo given flesh, a performance made permanent. Inside the palace, the illusion deepened. Nero dined with him as with a queen, addressed him as Poppaea, and wept in the night beside his bed. The boy's silence became his survival. Every gesture, every word was studied, rehearsed, and reshaped to preserve the emperor's delusion. Rome itself became an audience to the theater of power, an empire compelled to applaud the madness of its ruler. Yet the empire was beginning to rot from within. In the distant provinces, legions rebelled. Governors refused orders. The Senate whispered treason. The same people who once worshipped Nero now prayed for his fall. The emperor ignored the signs, staging elaborate plays and singing of divine rebirth while his kingdom splintered beneath him. Still, the emperor's devotion to his creation grew. "You are the only one who remains faithful," Nero told Sporus one night, his breath heavy with wine. "Even the gods envy what we have." His voice was soft, but his hand, resting on the boy's arm, trembled. Grief and power had twisted together until he could no longer tell them apart. When rebellion finally reached Rome, Nero fled the city with only a few companions. Sporus followed, still veiled, still silent, the ghost of a woman walking beside a man haunted by his own ruin. They took refuge in the villa of Phaon, a loyal freedman, while the empire hunted its fallen god. There, surrounded by shadows and the faint sound of soldiers in pursuit, Nero stared into a mirror by lamplight. His reflection seemed alien, a parody of the artist and emperor he once claimed to be. "Is this how it ends?" he whispered. "The world unworthy of me?" He turned to Sporus, who stood motionless, the veil hanging loose around his face. "You will not leave me, will you?" Sporus did not answer. He had nothing left to say. When the soldiers arrived, Nero could not face them. Cowardice, not courage, guided his final act. "What an artist dies in me," he murmured, clutching a dagger. He trembled, unable to strike. It was Sporus who steadied his hand, guiding the blade toward the emperor's throat. When Nero's breath escaped in a final gasp, the boy closed his eyes. For the first time, the palace of illusion was silent. But death did not free him. In the aftermath, the empire turned like a wheel. Otho took the throne, then Vitellius after him. Each saw in Sporus a token of Nero's legacy, an ornament of imperial perversion. Otho treated him with pity, calling him Sabina still, as though kindness could undo the past. But when Vitellius rose, cruelty returned. At his feasts, Vitellius paraded Sporus before drunken nobles. "Behold," he sneered, "Nero's bride." Laughter echoed through the hall as the boy, dressed once more in the garments of an empress, bowed before Rome's new monster. Every gesture was humiliation. Every laugh was a wound reopened. Then, one night, Vitellius announced he would stage Nero's wedding anew, for amusement. Sporus would play the bride. The courtiers applauded, but the boy's face remained still. He knew what such a performance would demand. Before dawn, the servants came to summon him. They found him lying motionless, a small silver dagger at his side, the veil folded neatly across his chest. There was no cry, no struggle, only silence. In that silence was the first choice Sporus had made for himself since Nero's gaze had fallen upon him. Rome moved on. Statues rose and fell. New emperors claimed divinity and destroyed it in turn. Yet the story of the boy who became an empress lingered in whispers, the tale of a soul consumed by the empire's need for spectacle. They had called him Sabina, goddess, wife, but history would remember his true name, Sporus. A reflection made flesh, a life devoured by love's delusion. And beneath the ruins of empire, one question still echoes. When power demands illusion, how many ghosts must be created to keep the lie alive?